Early reports have linked the Mets to Carlos Rodón and Andrew Heaney in free agency. Could the signing of Rodón mean the end to Jacob deGrom's tenure with the Mets? Is Andrew Heaney a good fit as well? I'll dive into both of their free agent cases on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find out my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now here we are, free agency is upon us. There's been some movement in the reliever market with Edwin Diaz signing with the Mets. Robert Suarez, a target we discussed, re-signing with the Padres, and Rafael Montero, a former Met, re-signing with the Houston Astros. But everyone else basically is still out in the market, and early reports have linked the Mets to 3 free agents so far. You have Andrew Heaney and Michael Conforto, and we're going to discuss Heaney in the final segment today. Michael Conforto, we did a podcast on, I believe it was last week, if not the week prior, so you can go back into the archives there and find my thoughts on a Conforto reunion. Spoiler, I still like it. But Rodón is the juicy one, right? This is a guy that's, angling for a Cy Young. He has been one of the best pitchers in baseball over the last 2 years. I mean, it's that simple. You look at the numbers, he is one of 49 pitchers that have eclipsed 300 innings pitched over the last 2 seasons. Among those pitchers, he leads them all in strikeout per 9 at 12.23 and home run to fly ball rate at 7.8%. Also in FIP, which is fielding independent pitching, at 2.42. And let's look at those 3 things together, and that makes it pretty clear why he is the FIP leader in baseball over the last 2 seasons. Because if you're striking out guys and you're keeping the ball in the yard, as a starting pitcher, as a pitcher in general, you're doing your job, because the onus is then on the guys that are behind you in the field to make plays. But if you are setting a lot of guys down on strikes and you're not giving up home runs, what more can you ask for? And that's led to great results. He has a 2.67 ERA. That is the 4th best mark in baseball over that span. He's 3rd in F4 behind Corbin Burns and Zach Wheeler. Also should note Max Scherzer leads the league in ERA over the last 2 seasons at 2.38. But back to Rodón, he is 4th in xFIP, that's expected fielding independent pitching. So that is trying to limit some of the variables like park and the defense and all these other different things. Obviously, with it being another FIP stat, tries to give us the best estimation, right, of what a pitcher's ERA should be, what we can expect it to be moving forward. Over the last 2 seasons, a 3.02 xFIP. His ERA has been 2.67. So a really solid pitcher. That's the bottom line here. And you look at the arsenal, what we're working with when it comes to Rodón, it's the fastball. The fastball is electric, from the left side at 95.5 miles per hour. Throws it 61.2% of the time. Batters are hitting just 213 on the pitch this past season. 358 slugging percentage. His slider, he throws 31.1% of the time. There's a curveball and a changeup he mixes in, but really it's fastball, slider. Slider is a 10-mile-an-hour difference between his fastball at 85.4, a whiff percentage on the pitch at 39%. Batters hit 193 against it this year, 239 slug. It breaks, his slider does, 3 inches more, both horizontally and vertically, than the average slider. So you're just getting that sweeping movement. You pair that at the bottom of the zone with the fastball that works up in the zone. And it's a dynamic pitcher. It's that simple. His run value on his fastball this year was -22. Run value, simply put, is a stat that tries to tell you, based on the results that you got on each pitch, if there's the bases loaded and you strike out a guy, the run value is going to go down. If you give up a grand slam in that spot, the run value is obviously going to shoot up. you look at that statistic, and he's at a minus 22 run value for his fastball, minus 9 on his slider. His fastball was tied with Nestor Cortez as the second best one in all of baseball. Justin Verlander, the only pitcher that accumulated more run value with his fastball at minus 24. Now, you look at the season he just had as a whole. Coming off a year where he made 31 starts, pitched 170 innings, had a 11.98 strikeout per nine, and a 2.88 ERA. All of these stats, everything I just said, paints a brilliant picture for what Carlos Rodón could be. And as we continue throughout this offseason and free agency over the next coming weeks and months, to me, based on the Mets' needs, they failed this offseason if they don't sign one of three pitchers, either Jacob deGrom, Carlos Rodón, or Justin Verlander. And I would say to a certain extent, I would let them off the hook if they got Kershaw. But man, is that a big risk. And I just don't see Kershaw going anywhere else but returning to the Dodgers. And I believe the last I read, there is already some talks of a reunion there. So again, it comes down to the top three on the market: Rodón, deGrom, Verlander. And I also think Verlander has a pretty good chance of going back to the Astros. So really, with that in mind, it could be Rodón or deGrom in this sense. And, you know, we're going to dive into the injury history in the next segment and a direct comparison between the two. I love Jacob deGrom. I've made that very clear on this podcast. To me, clearly the top priority in free agency is bringing him back. There's nothing else that's even close to it. I don't think the Mets are getting Aaron Judge. And with that in mind, I don't see a player on the market that can mean more to the Mets next year than Jacob deGrom can. And you get to the playoffs again like you did this year with Scherzer and deGrom. I know it didn't work out, but give that tandem another two cracks at it, and I think the Mets have a good chance to win a World Series. So that's still where I'm at with this. But if you want to tell me that Rodón is the best pitcher on the market based on what he's done the last 2 years and based on his age, I can hear you out. And I also could say that there is a chance that Rodón could be the best paid pitcher on this market because he might get the most years. If deGrom doesn't get more than 3 years, which would be at a massive, massive number, I also guarantee you, that could even rival what Rodón would get over a 4 or 5 year deal. But if deGrom only gets 3 and Rodón gets 5 or 6, there is a chance he ends up getting the most total money on this market. But we have to see how it plays out. At the end of the day, though, it's deGrom or Rodón for me. But the question is, which one makes the most sense and which one can you build around more? Because if Rodon's going to be cheaper, could you maybe get Rodón and Andrew Heaney for the same amount of money that it would take to sign deGrom alone? That's what we're going to talk about throughout the rest of the show. Before we get to that, though, BetOnline.net is your number one source for your sports betting info this season with stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer to esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net, and they also have odds on some of these free agents. So Jacob deGrom currently listed, and this is if he does not re-sign with the Mets, at plus 100 to sign with the Rangers, plus 550 to sign with the Dodgers or the Braves, plus 600 to sign with the Yankees. Everyone else, the odds are over 1,000. If you love sports podcasts, you can find that at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Who is the better bet for the New York Mets to sign this offseason? Is it Jacob deGrom or Carlos Rodón? This is something that I've been discussing for a little bit now, and I try to get out in front of the discussion I've seen recently a while back, which was when I tweeted out that anybody who is making the argument to sign Carlos Rodón over Jacob deGrom due to injuries has no idea what they're talking about. And the reason I say that, these guys debuted at roughly the same time. Rodón 2015, deGrom 2014. But if we just look back to 2015 and on, Jacob deGrom has pitched roughly 1,200 innings in the big leagues. He has made 209 starts. Rodón has pitched in 152 games, 5 relief appearances, 147 starts, and is just shy of 850 innings pitched in his career. So across the same time period, with deGrom's injuries the last 2 years, he still managed to throw, over 350 more innings than Rodon and make, over 60 more starts. Rodon has an extensive injury history. And this is not an apples to apples comparison because Rodon is coming into this free agency with a better bill of health recently. But we're talking about signing a pitcher to a 5 or 6 year contract who has a shoulder injury history that dates back to the beginning of his career that plagued him throughout. He had Tommy John surgery in the middle of his career there, 2018, 2019, around there. And he still had the shoulder injury issues as recently as the end of last season, where in 2021, he basically had a case of dead arm at the end of the year where they had to shut him down. They tried to build him back up. The velo was way down. Maybe that was growing pains. Maybe that was a guy that had been injured, hadn't really figured it all out off of the Tommy John, but was getting back into it and went, had a huge innings jump to over 130 and then needed that offseason to build himself back up, bet on himself, makes every start this year, nearly pitches 180 innings. Maybe all of the injury woes are behind him. Certainly a possibility. For the same token, Jacob deGrom had a clean bill of health for a very long time. A little injury at the end of the 2016 season, otherwise from 2014 through the first half of 2021, he was healthy. So if you're telling me that you would rather bet on Carlos Rodon on a longer contract than Jacob deGrom on a shorter one based on their injury histories, again, I tell you, you don't know what you're talking about. Now, if you want to tell me that based on the last season we saw and the fact that Carlos Rodon might make, $10 to $15 million less per season than deGrom, I'll hear that conversation. I'll hear that argument. If you want to say, well, you can sign Rodon and Andrew Heaney or just deGrom, maybe I can come around to your line of thinking. I just can't get there with the idea that we're going to, suddenly paint Rodon as this pillar of health when he's been anything but that throughout his career. He's a big risk, a very big risk still, especially if he gets the 5-year deal that I'm sure he wants. And I bet he's looking right at Kevin Gausman and Robbie Ray. Those guys made $110 and $115 million respectively over, 5-year deals, Ray getting the bigger contract. There's a chance that he gets in that range. There's a chance he gets more than that. I think kind of the top line for him, especially if it is over a 5-year deal, would be max $30 million. But I think even that's high. I think if it was that many years, you're looking maybe at 25, maybe 20 in between the two, maybe 26, 27. So if you're saying you can sign Rodon, let's just call it the low end of it, right? Let's just say it's 5 for 175. Did I do the math on that right? I did not. 5 for 125. This is what we learn all the time about Ryan. Horrible at math. That's why you got a degree in journalism. Yes. 5 for 125. That'd be a steal of a contract. If you could get him to sign that, by all means. If instead you're looking at, the high end, the $30 million a year over 5 seasons, again, we get to math. I'm pretty sure that's $150 million. It's a little bit rich, but then at the same time, if you're saying you get 5 years of Rodon at 150 total, or 5 years of deGrom, or 3 years of deGrom at 150, that's $50 million per season. Well, deGrom might just press himself out of Queens if that is the contract he's looking to sign. So it comes down to dollar amount. At the end of the day, if you get either of them, I'm happy because of deGrom's ties to the organization, because I still think that Jacob deGrom is a better pitcher than Carlos Rodon, and I believe that he can be healthy over a shorter-term deal. That's 3 years, 4 years. Hell, I'd sign him to a 5-year deal because it's Jacob deGrom. I can get around that notion and understand where the Mets would be coming from if they choose to sign the free agent that's going to make a little bit less, and in turn, if they can reinvest that money in their rotation elsewhere or in other needs. If it's Rodon and Conforto or just deGrom. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can look at it. at the end of the day, you have to sign one of those two guys, and then there's still more that has to be done. So it's how are you getting there? What else are you doing? We've kind of gone through this a bunch, but the needs the Mets have, they had to build a bullpen from scratch. They got Diaz back. They got a lot more work to do. They got to add 2 starters, and they have to either re-sign Brandon Nimmo or address that absence. And then on top of that, they really want to address their team, maybe getting a DH to pair either with Vogelback or to just man that position altogether. So, yes, signing someone other than Jacob deGrom would leave you more money to play with. But if money's not an object, and with Steve Cohen, there's a chance it's not. And you're telling me in a vacuum which guys you want to take the ball more, Jacob deGrom or Carlos Rodon? No, I cannot get to the point where I would put Rodon above deGrom in free agency. But they're both fantastic options that the Mets should be all in on because, again, outside of them on this market, I think Verlander and Kershaw go back to their respective teams. And trying to replace Jacob deGrom with Jose Quintana or Tyler Anderson or, obviously bringing back Chris Bassett and having him be your number 2 now, none of that works for me. So with all that said, it boils right back down to Rodon or deGrom. Beyond that, it's the trade market. But again, if you can pay for one of those 2 guys as opposed to trading Francisco Alvarez to get a starter atop your rotation, you do it. But then who else will fill out the rotation? Would it be enough to sign one of those 2 guys and to nab Andrew Heaney? That's what we'll discuss next. And the Mets reportedly have interest in signing the left-hander. The New York Mets have interest in signing Andrew Heaney, who just spent the last season with the Dodgers, but has history with Billy Epler, dating back to their respective times with the Angels. And look, I'm looking at his Baseball Savant page right now. What you see is the guy gets hit hard, but he also does a great job limiting contact, getting strikeouts. He's in the 97th percentile this past season. In strikeout percentage, 96th percentile. Chase rate, 92nd percentile in fastball spin. 96th percentile in whiff percentage, 78th percentile in walk percentage, 86th percentile in expected batting average. But he was at the bottom of the league in hard hit percentage, as well as average exit velocity and barrel percentage. You look at the arsenal, very similar to Rodon, honestly. Fastballs up, sliders down. The fastball was at 93 this year, a little bit of an uptick in velocity from where he was the year prior with the Angels. Whiff percentage over 30%, put away percentage 28.9%, batters hit 228 on the pitch, 449 slug, and gave up 9 home runs on the fastball, 3 on the slider, batter slug 340 on that, 170 average, 44.3% whiff percentage, put away batters at a 31.3% clip on the pitch. And then you had the changeup. He only threw that 5% of the time and was wrecked when he did. 375 average, 813 slugging. You had a double and 2 home runs on 16 of the batted ball events there. So not necessarily his best pitch, but it's basically fastball slider for Heaney. Now, the results, 3.10 ERA, made 14 starts, pitched in 16 games, 72 and 2/3, a whip of 1.09. All of this is to say Andrew Heaney is a nice option, but to me, it's, high-end depth. That's the way I would look at it. Could Andrew Heaney next year, who just, again, struck out batters, 35.5% clip this year, come together completely, stay healthy for once, and be your number 3 starter come October? Absolutely. Is there a high chance of that happening based on the injury history? No. So it's a buy low type deal where, yes, he had a great season, but didn't prove he could be healthy. So probably not going to break the bank. It's giving him an opportunity. And with the depth that you have already, I'd be okay with it. I would be fine if the Mets went into this season. Let's say they signed deGrom or Rodon. If you want to tell me that that was all they were able to do and they ended up going through the offseason and it's Scherzer and deGrom / Rodon, one of the two, with Heaney, Carrasco, and Peterson as, the guys you expect to break camp with McGill, Lucchesi, and Budo as your depth, I'd be fine with it, and maybe you sign a Joe Ross to give you a little extra depth, and that during the season there's a chance that you'll have to trade for a starting pitcher if Heaney's not healthy, if one of your other two big injury risks in deGrom or Rodon isn't healthy, even Scherzer being healthy coming off the season, and you just say, look, we have enough high upside guys by bringing in Heaney and one of these two aces, so let's just see what it looks like. Let's get through the season. If we have to address it, we do. Then I'm all for it, because if you have to make a trade for a starter anyway, maybe it just makes sense to bring in enough guys that you can bet on, and you go into the season, you see what happens. And if you have to pay that exorbitant cost to get a starter, maybe you do it then. Maybe, by that point, Francisco Alvarez is your starting catcher, but Kevin Parada is tearing the cover off the ball in the minors, and suddenly you have some clarity that Alvarez is going to stick. You know that Parada is expendable, and mid-season, you can make that big swing and trade for Corbin Burns or Brandon Woodruff or whoever else is out there on the market. All of that can happen. I like these options for the Mets. I still love deGrom resigning more than anything else. And I still think that, over Heaney, there's other pitchers in the market that are a little bit more dependable that I like more to maybe fill that Chris Bassett role. Maybe I'd prefer a Jose Quintana just based on the fact that you feel a little bit better about his ability to stay healthy. Or maybe I like Nate Eovaldi a little bit more with his upside. I don't know if Ross Stripling is quite the pitcher that a Chris Bassett is, but he's coming off a really nice season, and I think he'd be a good pitcher to bet on. So there is a lot of talent in the starting pitching market. The upper echelon is a little bit more thin, though. So getting back to the beginning of this conversation, there's two guys you really have to look out for to see what they're doing in free agency. Hopefully, in my opinion, Jacob deGrom's back in a Mets uniform, but all of these guys are great options. And look, if Steve Cohen goes nuclear and signs Jacob deGrom and Carlos Rodon, which is an insane scenario to envision, you're feeling amazing about where this rotation is heading into next season. Don't count on that one, though. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, @Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show, @Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in the sports world, with instant game reactions, breaking news, the take of the day. You can follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.